Alrighty, so if you've been a member of the channel for a little while, you would know that I generally like to use LGA 1155 for my budget builds. And that is basically because the CPUs are dirt cheap. For example, you can get something like an i7 2600 for around 50 to 60 Australian dollars, and that's not a bad CPU. So now that I've hyped LGA 1155 to be this amazing platform that you should do for every budget build, what's the catch? Well, the main thing is the motherboard availability. You see, LGA 1155 is back from 2011 and 2012, and that's quite some time ago. So it's understandable that a lot of boards from then would have by now failed. So now we're in this situation where we have a butt ton of CPUs and no motherboards to go along with them. And when that happens, you get a little bit desperate. This here is the Lenovo LGA 1155 board that came with some mid towers, and on the surface it doesn't seem too bad. It looks pretty much like your regular affair. You've got PCIe slots, you've got RAM, you've got CPU power connectors. It's all looking fine and dandy. But then there are a few other little things that make these maybe not worth your time. So let's find out whether or not you should buy one in 2021. Want to get rid of that annoying activation watermark but don't want to have to pay an arm and a leg? Head to cdkoffers.com today to get Windows 10 Pro for just $11 after using the promo code in the description down below. Simply sign up, buy using a safe and secure payment method like PayPal, and activate. Everything you need to get activated is in the description down below, so check it out today. Alrighty, so before we get stuck in, let's talk about what an OEM board actually is. So an OEM board is basically a motherboard that a company, say Dell, Lenovo, Acer, Alienware, etc., build to put in their pre-built gaming PCs for cheaper than, say, buying one from Asus or MSI or Gigabyte. And then since these pre-built PC manufacturers are building them, they can build them to a specific size or a specific style to suit a specific PC. For instance, HP OEM motherboards, I believe a few of those are all black to suit their gaming PC lineup. Whereas in Dell Alienwares, they don't typically have a side panel, so they just keep it all green. And then in some smaller PCs like this HP over here, they also have to change the size to make them smaller to actually fit in a small form factor like that without too many issues. And that brings us into the negatives of these boards. Yes, there are negatives, unfortunately. Believe it or not, it's crazy that you would run into problems like this. It's insane, really unbelievable. So some of the main problems that you can run into with these boards is things like a different size, so they won't actually fit into a standard ATX case, or they might have a different type of power connector, so you'll need to get like an adapter or something like that in order to make it work. And then you'll run into other smaller issues where they don't actually list out where the different pins should go on the front panel connectors and things like that. And then other issues you can have is things like CPU compatibility. For example, if you buy a motherboard that came out when maybe the first generation of Skylake came out, and then you've got a Kaby Lake chip that you want to put in there, sometimes BIOS updates can be pretty hard to find for them. So you might run into compatibility issues there. But that's not all. You might have noticed that the VRMs don't actually have heatsinks on them. So in the normal motherboard market, you generally want to buy a motherboard with heatsinks on the VRM because then your power delivery is going to stay nice and cool and you won't really have to worry about temperatures and long-term overheating. Where most OEM boards don't actually have any sort of cooling on their VRMs. And that generally means that these boards are going to have a shorter lifespan than, say, one with heatsinks or a more efficient VRM. So generally with OEM boards, the main things to watch out for are compatibility issues. Is your cooler going to fit? Is your CPU going to work? Will it fit in your case? And are there any power connectors that I'm going to need adapters for? So generally, if you're looking for a board like this to use, look it up, see if anyone else has done it, and also just look at the board itself and see if anything's different to what you might expect on a motherboard. So yeah, if you've been looking at getting one of these, just make sure that it's all going to work with your case and you're not going to have any compatibility issues. Also, on a side note, if you're looking to pick one of these up and you want to use, say, a stock Intel cooler that just clips on, I would watch out for if it needs a backplate of some kind, because often they are generally designed to be working with the cooler that they come with, not the Intel stock cooler. So sometimes you might need backplates to screw a cooler in rather than just clipping an Intel cooler in. So generally with aftermarket Intel coolers, make sure they have a backplate so that you can actually, attach your cooler to your CPU. Now, let's get to pricing. How much should you actually be paying for one of these? Well, in my opinion, you should definitely be paying less than that of a branded motherboard of the same socket. Even if it seems like it might be a lower end board, I would say just go for the named brand anyway. Because generally the named brands are gonna have a nicer BIOS and they're gonna have better quality components and all that jazz. So moving on to which ones should you actually buy? Well, that really depends. Basically, look at the board, see if it'll match everything that you'll need, and go for it if it does. And if it doesn't, and it seems like you'll need a bunch of different adapters, or it doesn't even fit into a regular size case, I would say just avoid those ones completely. And unfortunately, the case is, most of the really cheap boards are the ones that you generally can't use. So basically, just ignore the ones that are of a different form factor to something that you'd find in a regular size case, because generally those ones are the hardest to work with. But also, generally speaking, the older the board is, the better it's gonna be in terms of compatibility towards normal computer hardware. Because the newer it is, the more refined Dell or Acer has gotten with their process of cutting costs where they can and basically just making the board worse for us normal consumers. And that's my dog. So that's about it for this video. So if you found it helpful, feel free to chuck me a like down below. And if you also want to see more content from me, feel free to hit that subscribe button and also press the bell notification so that you get notified whenever I upload. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.